Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for another panel discussion. I'm going to be the host today, and we are joined by awesome panelists. The subject is very interesting. Please make sure you stay until the end. It's one of the global goals, and it's one of the UN global goals, and it's one of the most interesting topics that we all need to be aware of. It's about the sustainable development and how we can help, what are the technologies and use cases and the latest innovations that are available to us. So very interesting conversations. Please drop the comments. If you have any questions, please drop it in the chat and tell us where you're tuning in. We would love to hear about you as well. If you have any questions, any comments, let us know. Yeah, I will make sure that I ask the questions from our panelists, and they will address the conversation during the conversations. We'll wait a little bit longer. Hi, Omar. We will wait a little bit longer to make sure that everyone can join, probably 10 or 20 more seconds. And then I'll start introducing our awesome panelists from literally all over the world. So that's great. And wow, a lot of people are already commenting here. That's cool. Yes, just make sure that you tune in and stay until the end. We are going to cover many interesting discussions. We only have one planet, so we need to take care of that. And this discussion will give you some good idea about how we can do that. Economic growth was always one of the major interesting topics. Hi, from South Africa, awesome. It's one of the major interesting topics that everybody is conscious, and it's a driver of the whole economy. But we also need to understand how we are developing and what are the right metrics and measures that we are putting forward. So hello from India. Essentially, this panel discussion is the third and the last panel discussions we are going to have. It's part of the discussions on the UN World Innovation Day series of events that we have started by workshops, followed by hackathon in the last week. And now we are going to just dive deeper into interesting subjects. And finally, the closing ceremony will be 13th of May. 13th of May, within like almost 2 weeks from now. We are going to announce the winners, and we will be joined by awesome speakers. So also, I would love to thank our sponsors, Oracle, INE, and Trane Technologies. And also, these events were in collaboration with UNESCO and United Nations Environment Program. Thank you, everyone, for supporting these events. I'm going to jump right into the discussions by introducing our awesome panelists, starting from Tiah.
Hi. Okay.
Hi, Tiah.
Sorry.
So, here we go.
Backstage, lost in the wilderness.
Thank you for joining us, Tiah. So I would like you to introduce yourself. You're an awesome researcher, sustainability researcher, also founder at InterwovenHQ. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and also can you please give us some definition about what is the sustainable economic growth? Because a lot of people may ask, what is it that you're talking about? And you can put it in layman terms for our audience. So definitely we're looking forward to hear.
Okay, well, that's a big ask. So hi, everyone. My name is Tiah. I am the founder of InterwovenHQ. We do three different things. We develop educational frameworks for universities and accelerator programs to help you integrate sustainable development goals into your curriculum. We also do a lot of research around scaling social impact, and we work with corporates on how to incorporate SDGs into their corporate social responsibility. So my definition of the sustainable economic development is that's a little bit of a misnomer, but I think that I would define it as, how do you create economic development that is respectful to everyone and everything, which means how do we create economic growth that is allowing for decent work and for income equality and gender equality for everyone, while taking into consideration and putting in the center also the resources of the planet that we are living on. That, I think that's what I would say. I don't know.
That's awesome. No, that's great. Perfect. All right. The next panelist would be Scott. Hi, Scott.
Hey, everyone. How's everyone doing? I think I just saw somebody with a hello from New York. So I'm not the only one here on the East Coast of the United States up at 4 in the morning our time. So glad to say hi to everyone.
Yeah, that's great. We have very awesome, devoted, I guess, audience from all over the world. Also, thank you very much for joining us from US, 4 a.m. in the morning. And yeah, we would like to hear a little bit about yourself and INE.
Sure. So I'm Scott Cederbaum, Chief Marketing Officer at INE. At INE, we are an online information technology training company, and we focus on areas that we believe are critical to the growth of future sustainable companies. So primarily, we focus on training in networking, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and data science. And we're really excited to be part of this part of the Hackmakers Hackathon, because we think that by democratizing access to education, especially these roles that have typically required access to university education, we are actually able to help grow people sustainably across the world and lower some of those income inequalities and education inequalities that we were just talking about.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Scott. So our next panelist, Rachna from Oracle. Rachna is a Vice President and Vice President of Human Resource at Oracle JPAC. Thank you for joining us, Rachna. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and Oracle.
So thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, virtually. As Steve said, my name is Rachna Sampayo, and I lead the HR function for Oracle Asia Pacific, based here in beautiful Singapore. And the topic is sustainability. And when I think of sustainability, it is at the heart of Oracle's business operations, from managing our use of natural resources to ensuring responsible supply chain practices and really running sustainable events globally. Oracle is also very proud to leverage our greatest assets, technology and our people, which is to address some of the world's most pressing challenges today. The overwhelming majority of Oracle employees is really passionate, myself including, about protecting the planet and supporting those that live on it. We are very proud of the results we are achieving, and we are inspired to do more. As we like to say at Oracle, sustainability is everyone's business. Thank you, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rachna. And also, we have Dominique from Trane Technologies. Thank you very much for joining us from Belgium.
Hi, thank you, Steve, and hi, everyone. I'm actually originally from South Africa, so I got a little bit excited when I saw some hellos from South Africa. Currently talking to you from Brussels, Belgium. So I'm the Innovation Initiatives Leader for Trane Technologies. For anyone who doesn't know who Trane Technology is and what we do, we're essentially a climate innovator that is aiming to solve sustainability challenges through innovation in the heating and the cooling industries. You might know us better through our strategic brands, Trane and Thermo King. So essentially what we aim to do is bring efficient and sustainable climate solutions to buildings, homes, and transportation all over the world. How does this relate to the topic? So the heating and cooling industry is fundamentally an engine for economic growth, right? We need it everywhere we go. But it's also one of the industries with the highest impact in terms of carbon emissions. So just to give you a couple of numbers to whet your appetite, just for heating and cooling buildings is responsible for 15% of global carbon emissions. And if you think about global food loss and how that relates to transportation, that's another 10% of carbon emissions. So essentially, if we add the two, we have an impact to help reduce up to 25% of the carbon emissions. So we play a big role, and I'm excited to talk to the rest of the panelists to see how we're going to be moving forward and leveraging technology to help us accomplish that.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. And last but not least, we have David Jensen from United Nations Environment Program. Thank you very much for joining us, David from Switzerland. David is the head of UNEP Digital Transformation Task Force. We would love to hear from you a little bit about yourself and what is the Digital Transformation Task Force? You're mute. David, you're mute.
You know, the digital transformation person always has to put himself on mute every couple of hours and make a digital mistake. It just goes, par for the course. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all panelists, and thank you all participants. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yes, I'm heading the Digital Transformation Task Force right now, and our goal is really to understand how environmental data, values, and metrics can be coded into the digital economy, can be hard coded into the algorithms and platforms and filters of the digital economy, so they drive global sustainability. So that's what we're really interested in, is looking at the digital economy and how it can propel forward sustainable consumption. And if you look at the way the world is going, around 65% of GDP would be digitalized in the coming years, and that's 4 billion people connected to the digital economy. So it's a huge opportunity to potentially propel forward sustainability and sustainable consumption if we can get those algorithms correct, right? If those algorithms can not only optimize for profit, but also people and planet, we could actually achieve global sustainability. So that's what we're interested in the task force, and that's the mandate UNEP is now working against. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. So I would like to, first of all, start with the, I guess, elephant in the room, the COVID, the pandemic, which changed everything. Like literally all over the world, we have been impacted by this particular incident. And some of the opportunities came out of it with digital transformation, but majorly it negatively impacted the people all over the world. I would like to understand a little bit the impact of COVID on sustainable economic growth, and to know what are the positive and negative impacts and what happens from here. If anybody can start. Tiah, maybe you're...
Damn it, Steve! First of all, before I start, I'd actually like to just take a moment to really acknowledge the situation that is unfolding right now in India, which is absolutely heartbreaking and is a complete example of many, many things that are wrong within the system that we currently live in. I'd also like to say happy Ramadan to anybody who is currently observing Ramadan, and I hope that your fast is going well. I don't know how you do it. I take my hat off to you. So the question was around what if the COVID has had positive or negative impact on a sustainable on economic development. I think that my answer to that would be it depends. And I think that the it depends on who specifically, what viewpoint you are looking at it from. So if you take a look from a systems perspective, everything has a positive and a negative feedback loop. One of the positive feedback loops is from a work perspective. More and more people, I think, are aligning better with what they want to do and how they want to make a change in the world. And that has become evident because of the shifts that have happened in the workplace. We no longer have to go to the workplace, a lot of us, so we have the opportunity. Suddenly a lot of time that has to do with transportation has been freed up, and we realize that maybe what we're doing is not necessarily the right thing. So positive is realignment with our values. Positive could also be from an environmental perspective around the impact of not being able to commute as much as possible, the way that buildings are no longer using electricity, everything that has to do with that. The negative aspect is that women who are in the workforce and usually are the main caregivers of children, such as my two sisters, for example, have been majorly impacted by this because they now are the main caregivers for their children. And unfortunately, they are the ones who are suffering the most from an economic perspective because they have to be at home taking care of their kids. I think that has had a massive negative impact. I think that there are, so I also think that if you look at it from a different nation's perspective, there's also a lot of different things to take into consideration, whether it has to do with a vaccine rollout. I'm currently in Israel. Israel has been, depending on what your perspective is, has been extremely fortunate at being able to roll out vaccines at a very, very fast rate. You look at other countries where that is still struggling, such as my other homeland, Australia, where there has been massive challenges with that. So positive and negative. I think that also from an environmental perspective, COVID has had a massive negative impact with all of the protective gear that we are currently consuming and needing in order to be able to survive, but we don't actually know what to do with it. But on the other hand, emissions from all the other things that we have done. So there's no straight answer to it. And my perspective actually really depends on what side of the bed I wake up on the morning, whether I'm waking up on the world is going to hell in a handbasket, or whether I have hope in the world and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point here. You're right. It's not straight, and we have different kind of impact. We're watching different impact based on different part of the world that you're living, or the way that you're looking at the impact itself. Anybody wants to add anything?
Yeah. I will, yeah. Steve. I will. So Tiah, yeah, exactly what she said. I think it's going to be very hard to say, is it a positive or a negative, but there is an impact. And talking about, people living across the globe becoming more, I consider myself a global citizen. I live here in Singapore, absolutely safe, and I'm just about to get vaccinated as well. And my mom is in India, and every day I call her just to check on her and reminding her that she needs to stay indoors. And I've got cousin, extended family. So, to Tiah's point, what's unfolding in India, I think it has an impact on many people like me who are outside the country, but still has got, family. So we're worried about, but, I want to talk more about the technology. Technology is a great leveler. And in the way we've always known that the world is smaller, but with distributed working, it has become the norm. As an example, we have been able to mobilize our workforce across the globe quickly to enable them to work from home and maintain business continuity because we had the infrastructure in place. And if you just think about the JPAC or specifically APAC, and you have countries, for example, Singapore, New Zealand, Taiwan, Vietnam, Australia, possibly China, they have navigated COVID well. And maybe also because they have had some experiences with SARS in the past. Are we well positioned in APAC to take advantage of and get ahead of the curve, when the time comes post-COVID? I'm not necessarily sure, but signs are positive. What COVID has highlighted is that investing in digital infrastructure can alleviate the need for physical infrastructure. So we've seen how the reduced human traffic has resulted in cleaner air. It went down, it came back up, but still the air is a bit cleaner than we knew. Cleaner rivers, less noise. That's a sustainable positive impact on the environment. We've also seen how reduced flying resulted in less carbon emission and travel expenses for many organizations. That's a sustainable positive impact on the environment and the cost savings. We've also seen how urban planners are now rethinking how to do city planning to have more green spaces and less office spaces. Again, that's a sustainable positive impact on the environment. And we've also seen how a lot of people are rethinking their work-life balance with less traveling, less commuting to spend more time on themselves. And again, that's a positive impact on their physical and mental well-being. Having said that, we also we need to be mindful of that. The COVID situation is an evolving situation, and what's sort of evolving again back in APAC is a classic example of that the epicenter keeps shifting. Because the epicenter will keep shifting, we have to remain vigilant. And time will tell. I think maybe a couple of years down the line, we will be able to say positive, negative. But right now, what we can say is there is an impact.
Yeah, no, that's right. David.
Thanks. Just building on the two previous comments. I mean, I think COVID was obviously a global stress test on our sort of ability for global collaboration. And I think we succeeded and failed in different fronts, right? At the scientific side, we succeeded in accelerating a vaccine at a faster rate, I think, than ever before in human history. On the political and social side, our systems really, I think, kind of collapsed in many ways and haven't been able to come together for a coherent global response. So I think there's a lot of lessons to learn in that for environmental issues. Like if we can't come together for something like COVID response, how are we going to come together for global issues like climate change? So we really have to learn those lessons and make sure all parts of our systems are strong. But I think the thing that COVID also did is it amplified the digital divide. So many services went digital, and yet half the planet remains disconnected. And I think one of the big calls for action in the COVID recovery is closing that digital divide so those services can be accessed. And the one thing I would say is that, closing that digital divide and providing computer access to half the planet has a massive footprint in terms of energy, in terms of e-waste, and in terms of supply chain. And we don't have a strategy yet globally for dealing with that. I mean, everybody wants to connect the planet, close the divide. I fully agree with that. But there are environmental implications from the massive increase in information and communications tech. So we need strategies on dealing with e-waste. We need strategies dealing on renewable energy to power that ICT. And we need to look at the supply chain impacts from the ICT. So we can do it, but we need a strategic approach to doing it.
That's a great point. Dominique?
Yeah, really interesting points so far. I want to bring in a new perspective here, which is what we've kind of seen is that not everybody is seeing this, I want to work from home now. There's more and more people who actually want to get back to a certain normal. People who want to go back to restaurants, want to go back to offices. Parents are sending their kids back to school. And what we've seen as an acceleration as a result of the pandemic is just this general awareness around indoor air quality, right? And the air that we're breathing indoors. There are a lot of studies that show that we spend more than 90% of our time indoors. And yet no one has really ever cared about the quality of that air until now, right? Because we're all scared about what we're breathing. There was a survey which actually came out a couple of days ago, over 4,000 real estate owners. And more than 92% of those respondents indicated that they're expecting to see a huge demand in healthy buildings over the next years. And this is something that we had seen growing steadily, but the pandemic simply accelerated it. And this is great because healthy buildings have a positive impact on our quality of life and productivity, and that's fantastic. Here's my concern, though. If not done right, it also comes with an energy penalty, right? One of the biggest indications that we saw, well, probably one of the first recommendations that you heard when all of this started was open your windows, right? Get that fresh air in, increase that ventilation. Now, if you're like me living in Belgium, right, and you suddenly open all of your windows to get that ventilation, it's going to get really, really cold. So what do you do as a result of that? You turn up your heating, right? And unfortunately, in Europe, a huge majority of our heating is still provided by burning fossil fuels. So there's this sort of vicious cycle, right, that we see a lot of recommendations coming out to improve indoor air quality while increasing the energy tax. And our belief is that this doesn't need to be the case, right? We'll talk a little bit about, I think later, Steve, about technologies and how we see the future. So I'm happy to give you some practical examples about that. But I think this is definitely a positive spin from the pandemic. It's the fact that health and well-being has become the center of the conversation again. Some of you have mentioned schools and inequality. This is also something that the pandemic has unfortunately brought to life. It's the fact that access to healthy environments is completely disparited. And that is also something that we need to try and tackle for.
Yeah, that's awesome. We would love to hear more about the technology later, but in order to, Scott, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I'll just close out. I think when we're talking about sustainable economic growth and we're talking about COVID, I think it's really exposed the haves and the have-nots across the world in all sorts of ways. Obviously, the haves and the have-nots and who have been able to get access to vaccine. Some nations have been able to produce and get access to vaccines quickly. Other nations, unfortunately, have not and probably will not have access to the vaccine in any meaningful numbers for the foreseeable future. But in general, how we've been able to respond to COVID and all of us being able to come together in this digital infrastructure is because we have we are the types of professionals that are able to work in an environment working from home. Many of us have been lucky enough to be able to have dedicated workspaces. But when we think about a number of the people that are out there that don't have dedicated workspaces and working from home is a stressor, or they're sharing that space with their kids and their spouses, or they have to go out into the environment, like so many people. Sorry about that. I am having a lighting problem back here. Speaking of technology, trying to keep things sustainable.
That's all right.
I try to keep my lights
some energy.
But we have people who don't have access to the ability to stay home. So we've had grocery store workers and people who have had to work in hospitals and healthcare settings that have had to be exposed to COVID directly day in and day out since the day that this pandemic started. So there's a real disparity coming out of COVID for the types of people who have been able to keep their incomes coming in on a day-by-day basis throughout the entire pandemic. They've had access to childcare, at least the ability to keep their children engaged during the workday so that they're actually able to concentrate on work. And my concern coming out of this pandemic is because of this haves and have-nots, we're going to have a group of people that are going to be able to push economic growth while actually spreading inequality through other metrics like Gini coefficient at a much higher rate, because the people who were not able to stay employed, the people who do not have access to a stable income, the people who do not have access to technology like we're using right now to have this conversation, fell behind during this time frame. And that's not even considering all of the other economic losses related to actually getting sick with COVID, not being able to work potentially now or in the future. So I think from my perspective, there will be a lot of growth coming out of this COVID period as countries dig out. People are able to come outside. I think there will be a return to normal. People will want to go back to the office to some degree. And there's positives and negatives to that. But there's a whole group of people that have just been decimated during the last 15 months or so. And that group is going to continue to see the effects of that decimation even as we dig ourselves out of the last 15 months.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, that's a great point. And if you think about any practice of development that we all talking about it, it's very important to understand how do we measure this, and the measure makes us understand that what does success means. And we have been using GDP to measure the economic development for the last, I guess, couple of, for many years. And we need to think about it if it is a right measurement at the end, and if not, what are the different suitable measures that we would like to see to be more relevant. For example, GPI is another one that's everybody talking about it, or if you have any other suggestions. And also we can see that investors and the board members always pushing for the growth in terms of the revenue and the benefits in terms of dollar value. Maybe it's the time that we need to think more about the impact on the environment in general, or how we're measuring ESG through some sort of, I guess, annual reporting. And I would like to hear from you that what would be the best way to measure the sustainable economic growth and bring more stress and visibility into more important things than just the dollar value. Anybody wants to start with that?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question, isn't it, Stephen? I think I think this reminds me of the quote that we can know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I think that's what excites me about the digitalization of the economy, is we can actually begin to kind of separate price and value and begin to express what we value more easily. At the moment, we can only express what we value with one metric, which is price. But I think as things digitalize, we can actually express that we want to buy things that are sustainable. We want to buy things with low carbon footprints. We can begin to sort of express a multiplicity of values, and products can begin to express a multiplicity of values as well. So you have these concepts like the digital product passport, for example, where every product and service will have kind of a data pod that's attached to it that actually includes information about the supply chain, provenance, sustainability, carbon footprint, disposal pathways. And those products can begin to express their sustainability footprints and values more easily than they can today. So I see a future where products can express the values they adhere to and the performance they adhere to more easily with digital channels, and so can consumers. And then we can begin to match those on platforms. E-commerce platforms, for example, can much more easily do that matchmaking. And so I'm super excited by that, because it'll move away from price as the only metric, and we can move into sort of multiple values.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that would be the utopia, to see all these metadata attached to the products and services, and people who really value these data will be more inclined to even pay more to receive those kind of services, because in general that would bring more value. Anybody has any comments? Dominique?
Yeah, I can maybe jump in, right? From an industry perspective, one major trend that we've seen now from an investor perspective is this focus on ESG, which you already mentioned, Steve, right? And so for anyone who is like me, super bad at acronyms, ESG basically stands for environment, social, and governance impacts. If you're familiar with the CSR reporting, which is sort of how this started, ESG is sort of seen as the next generation of CSR. And the main differentiator here is around transparency. So this links very well to what you just mentioned, David, right? As a consumer, we want more transparency to understand where our products come from so we can make proper decisions. And investors are actually wanting the same information. So companies like ours are having to up their game, right? We can't just say you're sustainable for the sake of being sustainable. We've all heard about green marketing and green brainwashing. ESG is really upping the level in that sense. And another way to do that is really being very science-based as well. So just to give you a practical example, earlier this year, Trane Technologies committed to reducing by 50% our own product carbon emissions. And there's probably a lot of companies out there doing that, right? And we're happy that they are. What we did in addition to that was make sure that our targets are validated by the Science-Based Targets Initiative, right? So again, it's not just setting out a number so that it looks good to investors, it's making sure you have the science to back that up and that you're being completely transparent about it. So even corporations have a very big role to play in terms of committing to sustainability and being very transparent about how they're doing that through their products and through their operations as well.
That's great to hear about it, and that should be the kind of role model for all the industry and corporates to follow the same path. Tiah.
I'll wade in, but I'm precursoring it by saying that I have many opinions about this. I am not as well researched and well versed with. I used to be, but not anymore. So a lot of my data is probably not current. But I think that my perspective is actually a little bit of a different one in terms of understanding that this is actually all about economic incentives and what are we actually incentivizing in order to be able to make a change. So I'm very well immersed in the technology, in the startup innovation world. And one of the bugs that I have, or the bugbears that I have, is around, and the area that I'm interested in moving further into is around being able to figure out how can you, right now, when you look at the narrative that has to do with technology and with startups, the narrative is around 10xing. How can I, and venture capital that creates a lot of different issues around the metrics of success for a startup. And part of that is measured, that you can extrapolate that to what are the measures of success, generally speaking, from a nation perspective. I mean, right now I'm in a startup nation, and Israel is number 3 in the world in terms of innovation. And every single day that I read the newspaper, they talk about how many IPOs have happened and how much capital people have raised. They don't talk about what those companies actually are focused on. Are they focused on solving the right problems? What kind of entrepreneurial education is actually provided to be able to provide the proper incentives for the venture capital as well? So it's like a 2-tiered marketplace that has to do with being able to make sure that the investments are matching the shifts that are happening within the entrepreneurial and innovation space, that has to do with a shift more towards a blended and purpose capital rather than the old model. And I think that there's definitely, in terms of measurement, I think measurement depends on what you value, just like David was mentioning. And I think that being able to, I would like the conversation to be similar to the conversation, and this might not necessarily be the right analogy, but to the similar conversation around gay rights. So we no longer, if you look at the way that the gay rights movement started, it started off by you saying, hey, I have a gay friend and I support gay marriage. And now it's like, I don't really care what you are human. And it is no longer an issue in many, many countries around the fact that you are human, and what your sexual preferences are really none of my business. And I'd like to see the same type of the conversation move past what kind of measurements should we have to it is actually normal to be able to have a blended impact and understand that this is something that we can no longer argue about. That's my 14 cents. And depending on what economic structure you're in, that would depend on how much it actually is worth.
Thank you, Tiah. Also a great point about the workforce development and how to make sure that we educate people about the right values, and we have the informed, I guess, innovators and entrepreneurs. So yeah, I also would like to understand more about that. I would go to Scott because I guess based on your experience in the workforce development and what you are doing in education, I would like to more understand, are we doing what is needed for our workforce to understand what exactly is the sustainable economic growth, and to deliver the right value and have the right mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been in the education space, the technology education space specifically, for over a decade, and what I've seen is a transformation. When I first came in, most of the education technology was, at least in the United States, was focused on these broad degree programs, very expensive, but you could go online and get a degree that was of the same quality. This was the goal of the entrepreneurs about 10, 15 years ago, was to be able to go online and get a degree that was the same quality as walking into a university. And obviously this is a really positive thing from an externality perspective, because people aren't moving to be able to go ahead and pursue a degree. Oftentimes they don't have to quit their jobs. They're able to continue contributing economically and be able to keep an income coming through. They were able to, they weren't commuting back and forth to night school. So when you're thinking about about picking up education. You're not going on the subway. You're not using your car, sitting in gridlock, trying to get halfway across town to be able to get to classes. So there was a number of really positive pieces about this move toward digitizing master's degrees, digitizing undergraduate degrees that was happening in the United States. The problem with that was the expense. Most of these degrees, despite the fact that they were online, and you'd think, oh, we don't need classrooms, we don't have to put people in dorms or have to find housing, you'd figure it would lower the cost. The reality is the cost of producing that type of education was actually extensively high. The technology wasn't quite where you needed it to be, so there was a lot of development cost. There was a lot of video production costs. So these degrees ended up being just as expensive as their on-campus equivalent. And for those of you who are across the world and haven't had the joys of being in the US education system, you can get a degree in social work that costs upwards of $100,000 for a job that's not going to pay more than $40,000 or $50,000 walking out the door on an annual basis. So what we've been seeing in the space is to try to move more toward different types of credentials and different types of training. And I think this is really important because training doesn't necessarily have to be a full degree. It doesn't have to be a full degree offering. It can very easily be looking at what are the essential skills that people need for tomorrow. So David's talked a lot about digital transformation and the need to be able to focus more on artificial intelligence and how to do that in an ethical way and what that will mean for the future. Historically, people have had to go to college and get bachelor's and master's degrees focused on computer science or information technology. I think in the future, it's going to become a partnership between employers and their employees and trying to seek out the right type of education that's going to help power their careers. And I think the real change across the world is with technology moving as quickly as it is right now, companies are not keeping up with their corporate training programs, whether that is a focus on how do we grow more sustainably? How do I make sure that I am providing equitable opportunities to my employee base so that they're continuing to upskill? This is not an area that enough companies are focusing on. I think that in the 2020s, given how much things are going to change as a result of COVID, as a result of the need to have more people working from home, as a result of a different style of integration across the world, this is going to be the differentiating factors between companies that are going to succeed in this changing economy and those that aren't.
Thanks, Scott. That's great. Anybody wants to add any comments to that? I think he covered it very well. So we can, I guess, go to our next question, which is about the technology. We are all talking about the technology, how it is impacting many sides of our lives, and I guess the cutting edge technologies like AI, blockchain are the trendiest ones out there that I think would be hugely beneficial to make the global goals to come to reality. But I would like to hear from our panel, what are the technologies that are driving this sustainable, I guess, growth, and what are the latest innovations that you have seen out there that you would like to share?
I can start about sort of in the UN environment context. We have a mandate to keep the global environment under review, and yet we haven't had the tools to monitor the global environment in a systematic way. And in particular, cloud computing and AI really now give us the capacity for global, I'd say global near real-time monitoring. It's not fully real-time, but it's near real-time. And we can monitor, for example, air quality. We've stood up an air quality monitoring platform at a global level that aggregates national air quality data up into a global view, and provides for the first time sort of that global scale analysis in real time. And the hope is that we can, as a colleague said, first and foremost, we can provide transparency in terms of air quality. Where is the air quality improving and declining? Which countries are actually making progress against their global environmental agreements, right? And then importantly, how do we take that data and begin to plug it into the digital economy, as I said? So how can different kinds of environmental data sets start to be fed into the algorithms of the digital economy, of the platforms of the digital economy, so that they're optimizing for sustainability outcomes, for example? So, air quality is one. Another one that we're working on is global surface water. For the first time now, we can have a snapshot of the world's surface water and begin to look to see, where is surface water increasing, decreasing, where are the water scarcity hotspots? And then again, how does that then feed into, for example, what farmers are doing on the ground? So how do we take that global scale data and then push it down to a local level to inform local level decisions around farming and water management and things like that? So I see just this tremendous improvement in our ability to collect global environmental intelligence and conduct, basically proper monitoring, proper predictive analysis, and then to begin, I think the next step is to feed that down into individual farmers and livelihood decisions, and as well as businesses, to help them on their sustainability journeys.
That's very important. Data is the most important, I guess, part of the whole ecosystem, that we need to provide the data and make decision making based on data, but also how to source the data, how to make it available to the public and researchers. This is also a big question, because many different companies and organizations are collecting these data, and some of them are kind of behind the closed doors. How can we better serve it to the public and to everyone to use it for different purposes, and then aggregate it back, the results, and make it available for the public? I guess that's going to be one of the major things that we need to think about. But anyone else wants to add anything about the latest innovations or technology? Dominique?
But Dominique, go for it.
I think Tiah almost beat me to it, but I actually want to latch onto something that David said, because I love this concept of looking at everything as an ecosystem and how the different things correlate. We're facing the same challenge in the building industry, right? Traditionally, you look at a building and you'll have one company kind of taking care of the ventilation, probably an entirely different company taking care of the lighting systems, and then another company taking care of cooling, and in extreme cases, another company taking care of heating. So you have all these different aspects, right? Insulation, application, that have been dealt with separately. And for a very long time, we haven't really been able, we have always been able, but I don't think we've had the proper motivation. And just because our industry is so fragmented, to look at a building as an ecosystem, a living ecosystem. We have now new technologies which enable us to be much smarter going forward. Technologies like the building information modeling, right? So how do you actually model a building as an ecosystem to understand how all the different subsystems influence themselves? But you also have building automation systems, which again rely on live data to be able to react in real time to meet the right conditions in the building in an energy efficient way. So, I'll give a very quick, one of the things that we're working on at the moment is layered control strategies for indoor air quality. So I'm linking back to something that I said at the beginning, which is opening up your window, right, to allow more fresh air is not always the best idea, especially if it's cold outside. Linking to David's point, what if it's highly polluted, right? You're going to be opening your windows and you're actually harming yourself more, right? So being able to use all of this data to automatically make the right decision in terms of mitigation strategy that you use is the best way forward. And I think we have the right technology in place to be able to do that. It just takes the industry coming together and thinking about it more holistically versus the smaller parts of the building.
Thanks, Dominique. Tiah.
I think that in terms of, there's a couple of things that I think is interesting to take a look at. And I agree with everything that both David and Dominique are saying, but my perspective is a little bit different. My perspective is, I think that in terms of technology, sure, we're making advancements in terms of the way that of the type of technology. So, quantum computers is like the hottest new thing, and seeing how we can potentially do whatever we're going to do with quantum computers. But I think it's actually interesting to see who is accessing different types of technologies that have not accessed those different types of technologies till now. So, and how are they using it? So even just simple things like just regular apps. And I mean, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the no-code the no-code movement that has opened up access to being able to build simple things to a much wider variety of people, which is enabling a lot more innovation and a lot more different uses that we have seen before. I also think that there is an interesting shift that is happening around investments and in general around people that are trying to find different ways to make impact. And the blockchain and decentralized finance is a very interesting. It's a very interesting area in general that is shifting a lot of different perspectives. Crowdfunding, equity funding, and then also just more collaboration across different sectors, which I think is happening very rapidly, which we have not seen before. And also being able to look at how VR and AR have been promised to be like the new future of everything and of education, and I think that being able to be suddenly we are in constraint in an area of constraint. So that's where more innovation and that's where more collaboration is going to come up. So not necessarily more technologies, but different uses of technologies and different access groups using it for different purposes. That's my perspective around it.
Yeah, Steve, I'll put a completely different perspective because I'm not in the research or innovation. I'm an HR practitioner. So I'll take it from a very practical perspective, from a workforce perspective. And also I want to touch upon Scott's comment about corporations doing enough for staff development in the current environment. Again, being a technology company, maybe I'm a little bit blindsided as well because I take it for granted. Technology is at the heart of what we do and how we operate. Approximately 35% of our global workforce resides in JPAC. And you think about countries as in Pakistan, Bangladesh, then Singapore and Australia, we've been able to mobilize our workforce. Some countries are in hybrid mode, some countries are completely in a remote working environment. We've been able to flex our model to support their working arrangements, from assisting employees in their navigation of remote working, to mentoring my team via video calls, and also making sure our employees are safe. Has it been a learning experience and journey for me, my team, and for all of us? That's just touching the surface, right? When I look at my role as an HR practitioner, I think I have a huge responsibility towards looking after not just the physical, but also the mental well-being of not just our employee base, but also their families. And as we go through the pandemic crisis, even our leaders sometimes are under enormous pressure to juggle between what do they need to do for their teams and the same issues they have for themselves as well, and as they sort of navigate their way through their personal lives. And we've been confronted with leaders not knowing what to do. Having access to technology has really opened up and given access to more information. To Scott's point earlier on, we have been able to maintain our development programs, supporting employees during, with mental wellness programs, and their families as well, just because we had the technology to support that. I mean, it was wonderful. I think last year around July, August, knowing that in most countries, children were studying from home. Even my 14-year-old daughter, who was 13-year-old and didn't want to grow old because she thought that world was not a nice place to grow old anymore. And she felt that she could not do her soccer anymore because she couldn't see her friends. And we actually organized a session, and that sort of gave me an insight into all the parents are going through the same challenge. And we had about 300 children across the region on a Zoom call, really talking about what were they feeling. And the words that I heard from them: anxiety, I'm angry, I can't go and visit a restaurant, I can't see my best friend. That's what technology has done for us. It has enabled us to reach out to our employees, their families, and provide them the support. So as I said, maybe I'm a bit blindsided because I have easy access to the technology, but I have to say, someone asked me the other day, think about when we were growing up in 80s and 90s, if this would have happened, we wouldn't have Netflix, we wouldn't have a mobile phone, and we wouldn't have all those other streaming channels that we watch to get through the pandemic. So I guess technology has made the life a little bit easier to get through the current challenges.
Thank you, Rachna. That's great. Yeah, we definitely would like to stay positive and to try the best to change it to something positive. So let's hang in there. So now we are going to I'm going to ask the final question to everyone. That's always the most challenging one for myself when people ask me about the future. And let's put the prediction mode on. And what would be the major, I guess, challenge in future? And what is your prediction of the future based on the current trend? I would like to hear from all our panelists, their, I guess, insights into the future. Starting.
So let me go first. Yeah, I'll go first, right? David.
Okay, great.
No, go ahead.
I
Awesome.
thought I'll just go first because I'm a mother. On top of that, I'm an HR practitioner. So I'll just take the opportunity to talk about what the future looks like from my perspective. Hybrid model in the workplaces is going to be the norm. I think we're all sort of agree to that. Normal travel that we knew before COVID, I think it's going to remain limited for a while, and it may never return in its original form that we've always been used to. Technology will remain critical and vital to our lives. Growing importance of data and analytics is going to be critical as you're going to be inhibited physically. But most importantly, there's a shift in the leadership skills. Primarily, two biggest attributes that have stood out in response to COVID and will increasingly be important into the future. Number one, leading with empathy. Number two, authenticity. Because I believe that there is a lot of choice for the labor market as the world start to come out of the pandemic, and it will happen. I am very positive about that. It will happen. Talent, employees will follow leaders that will exhibit those attributes. So that's just my prediction of the future.
Awesome, thank you. Future looks really interesting and positive. David.
Thanks very much. And I would agree the future does look interesting and positive. I think we have, as everybody knows, we have sort of this 10-year framework to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, to stop climate change, to address biodiversity, prevent pollution. And business as usual is not really working. Clearly, it's not moving at the scale and speed that we need. And I think people are recognizing that, right? I think everybody sees that we have to come together to solve these problems. And so I think the future looks bright because I do believe that digital technologies do give us the capability now to move at the scale and speed that we must. And I think if I had to say one thing about the future, I believe that sustainability has to become simple, seamless, and completely automated and driven by the algorithms of the digital economy. And I kind of see almost a bifurcation of platforms. I see algorithms and platforms that drive sustainability and those that don't. And I see basically businesses seeing a massive potential in jumping on the sustainability track and really coming out, leading this. And I think consumers, if I've seen the numbers correctly, around 80% of people want to consume sustainably. They just don't have the tools to find the products and services to enable them to do that. So I see that consumer preferences and the business models actually coming together to propel this forward. So the future from my side looks bright, provided, again, we can close that digital divide, and we can close that digital divide in a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive way.
Thanks, David. That's awesome. Elon Musk, if you're listening, you can stop going to Mars. It's going to be fine here. So, Tiah, would you like to go next?
Oh man, that's kind of, again, I think that I may be a little bit of a different perspective. Sometimes I feel very hopeful about the future, and sometimes I feel very despondent about the future. I feel that this experience of the global pandemic has increased our global divide. And I was reading some of the comments, and I think that we talk a lot about digital technologies, and I want to highlight the fact that I feel very privileged to be in a situation where I am sitting in front of a computer, have access to clean water, to sanitation, to a home, and am COVID-free, and am able to even discuss these aspects and these issues around what is the future going to look like. I think that it is important to remember that more than half of the population of the world does not have the opportunity and the privilege to actually have these type of conversations. So the thing that I think a lot about is what is my role, and what do I want to do? What is my theory of change, and what is the vehicle that I want to use in order to be able to make the most amount of change? So I think that in terms of where the future is going, I would agree with the aspect of, from a personal perspective, I think more people are becoming aware of what their responsibility is and are seeking different ways to be able to interact in the world. So I do have hope for the younger generation and seeing how they are stepping up and how they are shifting and changing conversations, and they're pushing a lot of the change that is actually happening. I think that in terms of the digital divide, I really hope that the digital divide will decrease. I think that when you think about exponential growth and when you think about cost per unit, the cost is definitely going to go down, and therefore the access to the information technology age is going to be accessible to a lot of different people. I think that when we talk about the future of work, the different types of skills are going to be much more important, and I think that the way that education is going to be provided is also shifting. To Scott's point around how universities and how educational institutes in general are providing the types of education, I think that that's going to continue to shift and change. It would be nice if it was faster. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with the University of Queensland and Griffith University, and both of those, which are high-tier universities in Australia, are still taking their time in being able to embed and think more horizontally around impact and around United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, although both of them are doing amazing work in that. So the future, I think, I hope that the future is going to be a lot more heart-centered and a lot more value-centered and a lot more congruency with those of us that are in the privileged position to be able to do that. And also more people being aware and awake of the fact that we have a responsibility to do this, that there is no other, we live in a closed loop system. And as much as I think that the space race is interesting, I also think that it's very dangerous because we are just going to replicate what we're doing here on a different planet. So I think that taking examples of leadership in New Zealand, of Jacinta Ardern, who's amazing, and taking other examples of leadership and grassroots movements that are happening, those are the things that I would prefer to focus on rather than on the continuous decimation of our planet and the future of humanity. that was a big statement.
Thank you, Tiah. That's great. They say practice makes perfect. Maybe the next planets will be started a little bit better. So
doubt it, but okay.
All right. Yeah, Dominique, I see you shake your hand.
Yeah,
what is your perspective?
I'm eternally optimistic, and I think I've gotten even more optimistic the more I've come to learn about technologies which we already have available. So, Rachna, I hope you're going to share this with your daughter so that she feels a little bit happier and optimistic about the future. I don't think we're far, right? We've kind of passed that stage of wondering, does climate change exist? Yes or no? Do we have the technology? That's answered for. I think we're now approaching, we're in the wave of understanding how can we scale this up? How can we make clean energy more affordable as well, so that developing countries that are starting to see a demand for more cooling and heating, don't end up impacting the environment in a negative way. But most importantly, I'm loving the benefits that we're already starting to see, right? Breathing cleaner air indoors, breathing cleaner air outdoors as a result of the decarbonization of transportation and heating. Who doesn't want to live in a world like that, right? So I'm extremely optimistic about where we're heading. I really just think it's a matter of scale, right? Scale and commitment, and let's just do it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Scott, do you agree?
So I think that the future that we're walking into brings new challenges, and I've been scanning the awesome comments coming in from our viewers. So I've seen a lot of people talking about what does it mean to have data transparency? What is the future of machine learning and AI? And some positive comments about what machine learning and AI will bring, and then some comments about AI is going to start taking a lot of the great jobs that are out there, and ultimately push people into different roles, or the need to change the types of jobs they're doing. I think the reality is we have a couple of challenges moving into the future, and they're going to essentially fall into two categories when we think about how digital innovation, digital transformation, and technology are going to help us move into a more sustainable era. I think number one is going to be data literacy. This is an area that I think companies still lack, despite the fact that we have well moved into the era of big data. There's still a lack of leaders specifically who understand how to harness it, how to understand it, how to analyze data and actually make good decisions and good conclusions based on what data are saying to them. And I think there's still a major question of how do we use data, and then from that perspective, algorithms in a ethical way. And I think this is going to be one of the challenges we really see in this decade, is that machine learning and AI is only as smart and only as ethical as the people training it. And there's a lot of hidden biases in the data that we're collecting and in the way that these machines can be trained. So I think that's going to be critical and something that's going to have to be taught. It's not going to be something that people are just going to figure out on their own. So that's number one. Number two, and I think an area that is that's scary, and we've only started really scratching the surface, is going to be as we become more digitally connected and as we have more items exposed to the internet, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is an area that I think is nascent from an importance and training environment. But as we have all of our personal information going up into the cloud, as we have all of our company's corporate information living in the cloud, there are going to be bad actors out there that are going to increasingly be trying to hold companies ransom, steal our data. And this is a reality that we're all living with on a daily basis. And I think that companies have not had the opportunity to invest nearly as much as they need to in the development of capabilities to keep their data safe, and as a result, our data safe from data breaches, stolen information, and what that means for the ecosystem. And then I think the third piece really does come down to data democratization. A lot of these wonderful future areas that we want to walk into is going to come from more data sharing and how we harness that data for good. And I think that's an economy that we haven't even started touching on. There is a lot of big tech that own our data, and that's data that can be really useful for helping us optimize energy usage, helping us democratize workforce, helping us make good investments, helping us make good sustainable decisions as to what we're purchasing and how we're purchasing, decreasing income inequality and the inequality to air pollution and all of the areas that we're feeling challenges on. And I think that until we solve the problem of how we share data appropriately and how we harness that data for good, getting to this future that we want to, I think is possible, but I think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's going to be a challenge of education, and that's why I am very excited about what INE is doing to provide education, all of the areas that we've been talking about related to networking, cloud, and cybersecurity. But I think it's also an area of how do we make sure that people are thinking and using all of these technologies for good and for sustainability, versus what I think, going back to David's comment at the beginning of this closing session, versus doing it just for sheer profit or for investor returns. So I think we're entering a world where we can do both, but it's going to have to take a concerted effort of leaders across the world to make that happen.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you very much. We're pretty much getting close to the end of the discussion. If there's any other points we would like to hear.
I just want to say, sorry, I want to say one thing about the perspective that Scott is saying, and I think that language is such an important thing, right? So you can choose to look at the world from a scarcity perspective, or you can choose to look at the world from an abundance perspective. And I think that the danger, there's two things. I agree with what you're saying, Scott, but my challenge with it is two things. One, if we continue with, I need to protect my assets and I need to protect what is mine, that is increasing the divide between all of us. So yes, I am not living, I am a tree-hugging, granola-munching hippie, and I believe in world peace and all the rest of that. But I also think, and I think that always be prepared, Scouts, Girl Scouts Pledge of Honor. But I think that focusing on how can we secure what we already have is, I don't actually think that that's the right trend. I think that focusing on how can we create more empathy and more connection and tapping into who we are as individuals and as humans, and understanding that we have a human shared experience. I think that is one of the most important things to focus on in terms of the trends for the future. I also think that access to I also think that being able to somehow shift the narrative around adding sustainability as an add-on rather than making it the new normal. Like it's not something that we have to think about. It's something that is naturally incorporated into absolutely everything that we do. And that is like, ideally, that is the future that I would like to see. I hope that was articulate enough. I get very passionate.
Oh, and I actually think we're in agreement on that. I think there are things that need to be protected. I mean, if the final point I made, the democratization of data, I think is really critical, right? Being able to share the information that should be shared. But we have information out there about all of ourselves that are owned by that are held by big businesses that we wouldn't want shared. Personally identifiable information. That's the type of items that we need to do a better job of securing. It's not information that's going to make the world better. It's information that's going to make each and every one of us a bit less safe if bad actors have access to it. So I don't disagree with you about the practice of needing more empathy and reaching across and sharing. I think it's what should be shared versus what shouldn't be shared, because the last thing any of us want are bank accounts or credit cards or in the US, social security numbers floating across the internet because of data breaches and that type of thing. So that to me is where that divide comes up, because to make the digital economy work, almost every company supporting that digital economy has to hold on to that information, and that's the information that you definitely don't want floating around, getting out there into the open internet to be purchased or used by bad actors.
Yes, but the whole point of sustainable economic development is to get to a point where we don't have to have people who are in a place where they have to do that in order to be able to make a decent living. So it's a very complicated web that has cause and effect of it, and I'm going to provide the platform for David to counter or support anything that I'm saying.
I'm going to support what both you're saying. I think it all comes down to the business model, and what are the, as you said earlier, what are the incentives that are driving the business model, and one of the things that we need a business model for is public good data. Right now, there is no business model to pay for public good data, and therefore it's a complete mess, frankly. It's totally fragmented and it's very messy. So we need to come together between public sector and private sector to say, look, what are the public good data sets that everybody needs access to, and then how do we pay for them? And how do we have much more of a collaboration between these two sides so that we can stand up these digital public goods in a sustainable way? Because it's not sustainable right now, but it very much could be. The companies that we speak to all the time, they want access to this data and they're willing to pay for it. And so we need to create that kind of bridge. But going back to the business model, I mean, this is going to be, I think, one of the essential things going forward for the future is transparency on the business model. How do companies actually make money? And do the business models drive sustainability, or do they drive the 7 deadly sins? And most of the digital business models, not all, but many of them, they drive the 7 deadly sins. And that's not a sustainability recipe, right? So that's got to be something that I think we start looking at much more, is that what are the business models that can really propel sustainability forward, and how can companies begin to incorporate them into their current operations?
Thank you very much. That's great. So on that note, I think we will end the discussion here. I mean, this was just something for everyone to get excited and to know more about this. This topic is much deeper than 1 hour discussion. So we would love to hear more about it, and please put your comments and questions, and we would probably have more of these kind of discussions later, maybe even soon, maybe within a couple of weeks we would have a follow-up discussion if everybody agrees. Thank you very much, our awesome panelists, and also the amazing audience that always help and support us by sharing, commenting, and watching these events. So we're way over the time. Looking forward to meeting all of you in the next live event. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Much appreciated. And thank you to all the panelists. That was an awesome discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we're back. We've been elevated. We've been promoted back into into the land of the living. We're out of purgatory.
I think we're still live.